In this video, I'm going to talk with you about idolatry and relationships. Years ago when I was very sick and I began seeing, I talk about this in A Soul Aligned, the woman that I started seeing who said that she practices vibrational homeopathy and it's based on energy and all of this other stuff and herbs, spiritual medicine. She claimed to hear from God and she claimed that she believed in Jesus Christ. I actually, around that time, did begin to hear from God. And it was during that time that he was teaching me about idolatry, that he was teaching me how to listen to him and how to stay with him and what these practitioners try to do. Better yet, the scheme of the devil through these practitioners. Now, I never actually met this woman in person. I only spoke with her over the phone and I had been connected with her through a friend. So I did not see her face to face. I could not see what she was actually doing. And I told you that, it was sometime later that I realized that she had been practicing divination. And the way that I figured that out is that I went to research what her background was and where she'd been trained and this type of thing, and realized that she had been trained through an institute founded by a woman named Hannah Kroger, who was deeply entrenched in the occult and taught divination. So no, this woman was not hearing from God. She was hearing from demons, and she was using the name Jesus Christ, the verbal name, but she was not in the name. Now, one of the things that happened during that time, and during that brief time that I was working with her, is that I would have symptoms that would come up and I would be in torment. And I would call her and I would say, is this normal? Is this what's supposed to happen? And she would say things like, I'm getting that you're going to be okay by tomorrow morning. And I would talk with her about certain things and she would tell me what quote unquote God told her, and it would conflict with what God was telling me. And it became obvious at a certain point by the Holy Spirit that she was requiring me to forsake what God spoke to me about for her version of truth. And thankfully, God was with me and he was teaching me and he was showing me the schemes of the devil. He was showing me that all he wants is for us to rely or depend rather on someone else or something else other than him. And that was the very point on which I stopped seeing her. I had no idea what she had been doing until months later when God moved me to investigate. The reason I stopped seeing her is because she expected me to depend on her. She expected me to depend on her for healing. She expected me to depend on her for answers. And she expected me to forsake my own relationship with God in order to depend on her, in order to trust what she said over what God ministered to me directly. It's the same scheme that Satan uses through psychics and through false prophets and through codependent relationships, which is really just idolatrous relationships, through so-called experts and heroes and the field of science. You have to understand this scheme of the devil. And this scheme has popped up in other areas as well. In people approaching me, and I've talked about this on the channel, there does become a certain point in people's healing journey where they're being tested. And I've seen this actually happen multiple times. And one of the things that's happened is that they then tell me, oh, I have a word for you from God. And usually when that's happening is when they're in a very tentative space in their healing journey and they're learning how to listen to God versus listening to the devil versus listening to self, because the devil will show up in really cunning ways. And so I've had this happen a couple times where people have said to me that they have a word for me. Well, let's look at the pattern in the word. People don't just come up to you, or God doesn't just send people on the street to come up to you and tell you, I have a word for you. That's what psychics do. That's what the occult does. That's what demons do. The only time in the word that he sends people to do that is when he's sending his prophets to give some bad news that, hey, you've gotten too far, you're not listening to me, and you're about to be destroyed. And so I will always listen and consider what people are saying, but every single time I've discerned it to be a lie. And I don't even think the person realizes what's happening. But unfortunately, I've explained it to some people and they get very offended because, how dare I, how dare I suggest that they might be hearing from a demon? I mean, we've all heard from demons. They're okay with me sharing my experience, but how dare I suggest that that might be going on with them? And the message has always been incongruent and inconsistent with scripture. And when I point it out to them, they get upset about that too. I guess they're above the spiritual condition that we're in. I'm listening to God on a daily basis. God sends people to talk to you and rebuke you and call you back in when you're not listening to him. He doesn't send them just to send them or just to give a word, because if you're listening to him, he'll give you that word directly. I've had people contact me and tell me that God is telling them that that I am the one that needs to baptize them. Listen, if that's the truth, I'm going to pray about it. And if I don't get that from God, I'm not going to do it. We have to stay connected to him before anyone else. And I did not discern that to be a true message. It's enough to have the responsibility of making sure that we're not hearing from a demon, that we're remaining in God. We don't have the ability to do that with other people. So why would we defer to other people to tell us what the Lord has to say? Now, here's the thing. In the work that God has me doing, he trained me for this work. He taught me very closely how to not set myself up as an idol and not present that stumbling block for others. So for those of you who've worked with me, you will testify to that when you start asking questions of me, that you have to go to God regarding those questions. I will, 1, share my testimony, and 2, shepherd you back to him. I will flat out tell you if I think that you're using me as an idol. And I had someone get very upset with me saying that on the channel about a month ago, that certain people were using me as an idol, and she felt very convicted and really attacked me. Because frankly, our flesh wants idols. Our sinful state pursues that. Our sinful state wants the answer right now, doesn't want to rely and take responsibility with a God that we can't see, touch, or manipulate. And God addresses it in the word. He even says to people, he's not even talking about psychics. He's talking about people who steal from each other words that are supposedly from him, going to each other and saying, "What's the word of the Lord? What's the word of the Lord?" He rebukes it. And he says, next time someone does that, you tell them, "The Lord forsake you." Now, let me talk about how this works in relationships, because it can get a little murky and confusing for some people, particularly if you're in a marriage. Because what does it mean that you have become one? Doesn't what I do affect my partner? Doesn't what my partner does affect me? Can't they hear from God on my behalf? Well, we have to take a look at the pattern of God. Yes, indeed, you are one with your spouse, and what you do affects your spouse, and what your spouse does affects you, but you cannot do the work for your spouse, and they cannot do the work for you. They cannot hear from God for you, and you do not hear from God for them. That's something that they need to do. And I'm seeing relationships in which people are doing this, in which one person is sick, or they have the issue, right? The symptom that everyone is focused on. And so the other spouse is not doing their own work because they're so focused on the symptom of the other spouse, not realizing that their own self-idolatry is affecting the union, is affecting the two of them. God is not going to sit you down and start talking to you about someone else. He's going to talk to you about you. And if what you do affects someone else, then that's where your focus needs to be. What's God calling me into? And let me pray for my spouse that he will speak with him or her. And as my behavior begins to change, so will theirs. As I stop setting myself up as an idol and I'm clear on what my posture is with them, they won't even have the opportunity to use me as an idol because I'm not falling for it, because I'm not setting myself up in that way. And in a male and female dynamic, it's often, not always, but it's often the male setting himself up, thinking, misinterpreting what it means to be provider, protector, and spiritual leader. Frankly, the only reason why You're a spiritual leader. The only reason why you can provide, the only reason why you can protect is because of God. And if you're not right with him and doing your own work, you can't do any of those things in and of yourself for your wife. And wives, you need to take responsibility as well. You cannot be setting your husband up as an idol and expect God to heal you. He doesn't yield his praise to glory to idols. You've been given a spouse to trudge with, to grow with, not to use inappropriately. So it is not appropriate. It's appropriate for the two of you to fast together, if there's an issue that's affecting your family, but your heart needs to be set on, what is my role in this situation? What is my role in this family? What is it that God is calling me into doing? It's not as though you can't pray and fast for your partner, but then you leave it at that. You let God be God. You let him minister to them. I've seen this happen in relationships where it becomes a shared delusion that we're hearing certain things from God about what it is that needs to be done about this thing, but then no one's really working on their stuff. If you're hearing from God, it needs to be congruent with the word. And I don't see in the word where one spouse was hearing from God on behalf of the other spouse, replacing the work that they're supposed to be doing with him. It's simply not congruent. And you need to recognize that as a scheme and tactic of the devil. Just because that woman who was sent by Satan was telling me that she heard from Jesus Christ and that she believed in him does not mean that she was hearing from him or believed in him. Just because people are contacting me and telling me God has given me a word for you does not mean that that word is from God or that I'm supposed to baptize them. No, I have to discern that. And if it was from him, then I have to also take up, well, why is he sending someone to talk to me? Why am I not hearing from him directly? What's going on there? I don't teach you how to hear from me. I share with you what God shares with me, how he built me, how he's healed me and continues to heal me of my condition. And I share with you for the purpose of you having your own relationship with him. My desire is not for you to depend or rely on me. That's not your design. And I certainly do not want to be responsible for that. When I am standing before him and need to account for myself, I don't want to be responsible for anyone else's idolatry, for setting myself up as an idol. So I hope you'll hear this message. I hope you will consider, how am I using my role in my relationships correctly? And remember that God sends messengers when you're not listening. He sends them to rebuke. In my situation, in the role that he has me in, there are certain things that he will talk with me about, such as if I'm working with a couple and I'm seeing that this is the situation, he'll start talking with me about that situation, helping me to see, helping me to understand. And yet, it's not for the purpose of me setting myself up as an idol. And again, what am I doing? I'm reproving the couple for the pattern that they've fallen into. In the previous role that I was in, when I was of the world and had a career of the world, we're taught to continually validate other people, to mirror them in the ways that they were not mirrored by their parent. That is a scheme of the devil. That is outright idolatry, because really what those people are doing is they're coming back once a week in order to get that validation, in order to get that co-signing so that they can then go back into the world, and they're suffering. It's never enough. You think a 50-minute session is enough to make someone okay? It's not even their design. That's something that you're supposed to be doing for yourself. You now were supposed to, through your development, through the design that God gave you, internalize a parent that validates you. That's now your responsibility, to mirror yourself, to soothe yourself. And in this way, then you're able to soothe yourself so that you're not in your flesh, you're not compelled, and you get into the heart and spirit, and you're able to bring yourself to God correctly once you've done your personal accountability work. why in the world would a therapist or a practitioner or an expert or a hero, whatever it is that you want to call him, why would Satan be motivated to cause them to engage in that, to take on the role that you're supposed to take so that you can then bring yourself to God correctly? Well, why do you think? Because as long as that person never learns how to do that within themselves, and they're always dependent on a human being, they're in idolatry. And secondly, as long as they're depending on a human being to do that, they never feel the need to go to God because they feel compelled to find the next human being that's going to do that for them. And third, you never get in the heart and spirit, so you're never capable of bringing yourself to God correctly. So if you're engaged in a dynamic like this in your relationship or a relationship or with a practitioner, and you're wondering why you're not healing or you're wondering why you're not hearing from God, consider the things I've just outlined to you. Consider the things that I've just described. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.